The dusty hard work of cowboy life. Grant-Kohrs Ranch National Historic Site, Deer Lodge, Montana. A National Park Service ranger stands in front of a wooden wagon with a canvas top. To the left is a line of cottonwood trees in the background, as well as some wooden fences. There is a stone fire ring in front of the fence, and a cowboy is working at the rear of the wagon.
Hello, welcome to Grant-Kohrs Ranch National Historic Site here in Deer Lodge, Montana. Have you ever camped under the stars? Did you look up into that night sky and look at all those beautiful stars? Did you ever want to keep doing that every night, all summer long? Well, if so, you might have a little idea of what it was like to be a cowboy. Today I'm standing in the backyard of the ranch here at Grant-Kohrs Ranch. Behind me is a chuck wagon. Chuck wagons were wooden wagons with these canvas tops. There's also some cottonwood trees over here. My name's Ranger Crystal. Today let's learn a little bit about these cattle drives and these chuck wagons. I do see that there's a cook here today. I wonder if he'd be willing to share some stories with us about cattle drives.
Come and get it!
Hey Cookie, would you be willing to take a few minutes and talk to us about some chuck wagons?
Yeah, I'd love to. I just got done cooking, so I'm about ready to sit down and talk for a little while.
Sure, great.
Yeah,
Let's
come on
share
over.
some stories.
The ranger and Cookie are sitting around a stone fire ring with a campfire burning. Behind them are cotton trees and a wooden fence.
But what was a cattle drive?
Well, a cattle drive is not really driving like we think of it in terms today where, I hop in a car or a truck, get behind the driving wheel and have fun doing that. No. What a whole group of cowboys that they call an outfit, and they're going to be centered around one of these truck wagons here, and each one had a different job and had to ride in a different position all day long. Together as a team, they move or they drive that cattle herd all day long to push them north from Texas up to Kansas, and then further up north all the way up here to Montana.
So the time of the year did they leave from one place, and when did they want to get to their destination?
Well, they usually left early on in the spring, so they wanted to be leaving probably about somewhere between the month of May in that time frame, and then they wanted to be ending their drive, especially if they're coming all the way up here to Montana, because by early November, a lot of this stuff is going to start falling on the ground. Well, about early November is when they wanted to be finishing that trail drive and have their cattle up here. You got a huge herd of cattle, and cowboys have to be in different parts along that herd and doing different things to keep the whole thing moving, the whole outfit going. You got to have somebody lead the entire thing along the way. It's, just about any place else has a boss with it too. But the trail boss, one of the reasons why he had such an important job was he had to go far ahead of everybody else and look at the land in front of him. Yeah, you could think of him as being like a scout, because the trail boss is the one who goes out ahead, looks for a midday stopping point, and comes back and tells Cookie, this is where you're going to stop and cook lunch. It's the same thing at the end of the day, too. He goes far out ahead to find out where they're going to stop. For the end of the day, where the cowboys are going to sleep, Cookie's going to make supper, comes back and tells Cookie at the wagon, this is where you're going to go and stop. Now, what is he finding there that's so important that makes that spot where they want to stop?
Well, cattle need something to eat and drink, just like people do.
You got it. That's why he's got one of the most important jobs, because he's got to scout far out ahead and find out where there's going to be some good grass and water to keep their cattle just good, fed, and happy throughout the night.
So would he be looking for a big lake that the cattle can just drink to their heart's content?
Well, I'm sure they would have loved to find a huge lake out there in the plains and the prairies, but didn't really come across that so much. I mean, there's not a whole lot of water. So that really shows you how important that job was, because he had to try to find what little creeks or watering holes or small rivers along the way that he could find. He's got to come back and tell everybody else and let them know where to guide him.
So he's the one telling people where to go.
He does. He does anything else that you would expect a boss to do. So he gives all the cowboys their assignments, where they're going to ride around the herd. Believe it or not, he's also got to manage all the money along the way. The rancher gives him the money so he can pay the cowboys along the way and pay for new supplies and things every time the chuck wagon runs out. But then he's telling his cowboys where to go to. Now, his best cowboys, his most experienced hands, he's going to put them on what they call point. And the point riders were the guys who would be right in front of the herd. They would be on either side of the front of the herd as they're moving along. And they're experienced because they have to turn that herd in the right direction to get them to that good stopping point, that good grass and water. And in case there's a stampede, they've got to be the most experienced because those guys have to be excellent riders who know how to handle cattle. But those spooked cattle are running like crazy. They've got to be the ones to direct the cattle to turn back in on the herd. They call that milling. It turns into like a big circle that's turning on itself. That's how they get to stop the stampedes.
That'd be the scary position to ride in, though, because at the start of a stampede, they could really be run over.
They could be run over, but that's why you got to have your best hands in front of that herd. That's why the point was probably one of the most looked up to positions that they had on the trail drive. Now, the other cowboys along the way, too, the trail boss would probably place them on what he called the flank, which flank is another word for side. So they would be on the side of the herd, moving along the way, trying to make sure the cattle don't stray off away from the herd, and they stay along with everybody else, moving the same way.
So a herd would be nice and compact then, like follow the leader almost, instead of just a big wide group just all moving in the same direction.
You could kind of think of it like that. Some people back in the day actually looking at cattle herds from a distance described it as looking like a snake moving across the landscape, because it would all be spread out really thin and have cowboys the whole way down the line, kind of like a train if you think about it that way. Well, in the drag, you're the one who's behind all of that dust that's being kicked up by all the cattle. You'd be riding through choke and trail dust. You couldn't see through it. It'd be pretty nasty. That's why one of the most important pieces of cowboy equipment that they had was this little piece of cloth right here. It's just probably about a brown piece of thin cloth, about a 2-foot square on either side, and just fold it up so it looks like a triangle. Call this a bandana. I see a lot of folks still using these today, but those drags, you had to make sure you wrap this around your face, kind of like a little dust mask or something to keep all that trail dust out of your nose, out of your mouth.
So a bandana was an important tool for the cowboys. Were there any other tools that they used to do their job?
A whole bunch of tools. Just about everything about a cowboy was a tool to do their job. You look at their hat. Well, cowboy hats served a purpose back then. You see a lot of people wearing them today and things, but cowboys wanted to have that really wide brim, keep the sun out of their eyes, off their neck, protects them during the day. You got this thing you could use as a signaling device. A cookie out here at the campfire. This comes in pretty handy for trying to fan the flames a little bit and stop all this darn smoke from going everywhere.
Yeah.
But your hat is an important tool for while you're out there. That bandana around your neck, and you use that for a bunch of different things. We talked about keeping trail dust out of your throat there, but you could also use the thing as a tourniquet if you get hurt out there, something to stop your bleeding. You could use it as a sling if you hurt your arm out that way.
Yeah.
Dip it in some water if you come across that. Put it around your neck. Nice way to cool off a little bit.
What did a vest do for the cowboys?
Vest was a great thing to have. It was kind of like I guess you can think of it as a cowboy purse or a cowboy pocketbook. Because this, when you're riding in the saddle all day long, you can't really get into your pants pockets, especially if you got your chaps on. So it's a handy way to have if you need to keep a notebook or a pencil or a harmonica. You just keep it right here in your vest pockets. It's right there where you can get to it.
Yeah, and you mentioned those chaps. What are chaps?
Chaps are basically big pieces of leather that go down and wrap around your legs and cover it. Now, up here in Montana, a favorite was to have wool-covered chaps. So they would be made out of, they would have wool from sheep on there. It would really keep your legs nice and warm during the winter months, so you could use that for keeping your legs warm. But a lot of cowboys, especially Texas cowboys, they needed those leather chaps on because if you're riding through really thick brush with lots of little branches that'll reach out, grab you, and scratch you and tear up your trousers and your boots, it's a way of protecting everything and protecting your legs from getting scratched up. Just about everybody's seen cowboy boots today. A lot of people wear cowboy boots, but those things were specifically designed for cowboys.
Well, how does the design of them help a cowboy?
Well, it could be a life-saving tool for cowboys. Now, you take the pointy toe on the end of a cowboy boot, like this one. That's meant to make it easier to slide your foot in and out of your stirrup on your saddle.
To be fast in and out.
Fast in and out, which is a pretty good thing if you got to get off your horse in a hurry. If your horse starts bucking. And a lot of cowboy boots, they have a really high angled heel on. Well, that's to prevent your foot. If your horse does start bucking and kicking up in the air, that's meant to keep your foot from slipping through the stirrup and getting stuck. Fall off the horse, and then you get dragged, and maybe your horse will be stomping on top of you. And then you'd be a dead cowboy. Or a broken leg, you'd get hurt very badly out there. So even their boots were designed for their work.
And they're normally made out of leather, which would go with those leather chaps that you were just saying.
Absolutely. A lot of things like that had to put up with the beating was made out of leather. because it was, it could be soft enough to move around, but it was sturdy enough to protect you.
And what kind of clothing did a cowboy wear?
Well,
Beyond their vest and their hat and their boots.
Well, usually cowboys would wear a long sleeve button up shirt like the one I have on, and have all sorts of different patterns on it. Mine is green and has a plaid pattern. A lot of cowboys just wear a plain blue or a plain white shirt out there. A lot of them wore blue jeans a little bit later on in the open range era, so kind of closer to 1900, they would be wearing blue jeans. Earlier than that, the 1860s to the 1890s, they'd be wearing wool trousers, so they would be kind of look just like our pants today, but they'd be made out of wool, which is nice thick material. I can put it with a little bit more punishment than cotton can.
So can you tell us a little bit about ropes and lariats?
Well, it was one of the most important tools they had, and was one of the most valued cowboy skills that they had. Usually their rope, and they had a bunch of different names for that thing too. A lot of people call it a lasso. A lot of those rodeo performers, those guys have spent a lot of time practicing this, which cowboys in the open range era did too. If you got cattle running away on you, or during a roundup, if your job is to rope a little calf that's pretty nimble and can run away from you pretty quickly, you got to try to get it on your first throw. But they called it a bunch of different names. A lot of it was because of what material it was made out of, but a big one that they called it was a lariat, which comes from the Spanish word, la reata. And that basically is Spanish for rope, which is what it was. Now, early on, when you have the first cowboys, who they called vaqueros, they were going all the way back to the 1500s. Imagine a time of Spanish conquistadors and suits of shining armor. They were the first cowboys out there. And then typically they were either American Indian or mixed race American Indian and Spanish were the ones who they trained to be those horsemen, so the cowboys go out there and do it. Well, they developed the skill of basically braiding rawhide, skin hide from cattle together into a rope, which they call the lariat, or la reata.
So their ropes really weren't rope like we would think of, like a yarn rope. It's a leather rope.
Every cowboy's got to get up with a partner, and for 2 hours, they got to ride in opposite directions around the cattle herd. Now, that's probably one of the most important things that they do out there, and I know I'm thankful for it, because one of the reasons why they got to do that is to make sure the herd stays together. And usually they'll sing while they do that. But it's important for them to do, because when they go around, they keep the cattle together so they don't have to get up and waste a bunch of time trying to track them down the next morning.
Wow.
But more importantly, those cattle spook real easy. We get some lightning in the background, some thunder out there. They hear some coyotes howling. That could spook the cattle. It could even just take a man standing up and shaking out his blanket, which spook the cattle. They're real skittish, especially in country that they haven't gone through before.
So would that affect just like the cattle closest to them, or is like all 3,000 cows going to get freaked out?
It could be all 3,000. It could be the whole herd. So even though it might sound like it's silly to be singing to a whole herd of cattle at night while you're riding around it, those night guards out there, they're singing because, unlike that thunder or those coyotes howling or that blanket shaking, you got a cowboy out there singing to that herd every single night. It becomes familiar to them.
Oh, so it's very calming, like a
It's
lullaby.
calming. It's calming because they hear something that's familiar.
Yeah, so if they'd had a really hard day, the cows were just being super stubborn, the cattle were straying all over the place, and they're constantly chasing them down, the weather's miserable, what could they do in the evening to pick up their spirits?
You can tell each other stories. You can tell each other jokes, funny things that happened that you saw, or stuff that you remember, the story that you heard from a guy who was in this town a long time ago, something you read in a newspaper. Cowboys read. They were readers. So a lot of them were reading books. They would read newspapers. They loved newspapers because it was news. It was something new that they could find, new stories and things like that. So they'd be swapping stories all night around the campfire. We still do that today when we're at the camp. Songs. A lot of cowboys like to write songs or poems or things, so they might swap songs. They'd say, hey, I heard this great song from another guy over that way. We should sing this.
Actually, that social element sounds like it was really important around the campfire at a chuck wagon.
Oh, it absolutely was. It absolutely was, because it's, you don't have as many things to keep yourself entertained out there. Teddy Blue said we don't have radio or any other forms of entertainment, so you get a big kick out of little things.
So, in Hollywood movies or TV shows, they love to show cowboys singing and playing the guitar around the campfire. Were there a lot of guitars and fiddles for cowboy music?
They didn't really have a whole lot of space for instruments out there. They didn't have guitars with them for a few different reasons while they're out there. One that a old-time cowboy explained was that when you're trying to prevent stampedes at night, you don't want to have a big shiny guitar out there that could reflect the moonlight into a steer's eye and cause a stampede.
That makes sense.
But then also, Cookie doesn't have a whole lot of room to keep anything in that wagon. He's got to keep a month's supply of food in there and all the bedrolls. But usually they just use their voice for their music. It was just singing. Or maybe somebody had a harmonica, but that was about it.
Harmonicas at least are nice and compact. And
I could just put that
fit
right
in
in my
a
vest pocket right here.
Yeah.
Nice and easy.
Right. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. That's the whole thing about the fire at the chuck wagon here is that this is kind of the home out there on the range, and this is the place where we sit down to just have a little bit of comfort and conversation with each other. So.
Credits: Ranger Crystal Tongish, Cookie Quinn Gilly. Filmed on location at Grant-Kohrs Ranch National Historic Site in Deer Lodge, Montana.